What do you gain by listening to this podcast? And how about the other podcasts on your feed? Odds are you listen to the ThinkPodcast and many other shows because you get a mental workout from them. They help you think deeply about topics that you find fascinating. And more than that, they help you think about practical steps to take to improve your life. And they are fun. You enjoy the hosts. After a while, you even start to feel like you know the hosts. In a certain way, there's a sense of community in listening to podcasts. People share ideas, other people listen, learn, pass them on to somebody else. Maybe you've messaged a link to an especially good episode of this podcast or another one to your brother, friend, or your wife. Intellectual stimulation, practical wisdom, and community are all things that we want in our lives. And for many of us, I believe that podcasts, by providing them, fill a gap that is missing from our lives, especially since college. I remember my time at Grove City College as being the last time when I could really make friends super easily, almost automatically. And those friendships were often sparked by an hours-long, late-night, deep, intellectual conversation about some fascinating topic. Maybe you can relate. However, podcasts don't really provide that face-to-face, in-person community. Now that you're out of college, starting a family and holding down a career takes up a lot of time, but you still want that intellectual community and fellowship in your life. The reality is that authentic, intellectual community can be a hard thing to find at this age. But what if there was a way to find intellectual community in your 20s, 30s, and beyond? That is the question that my guest, Charlie Cotterman, answers in his book, To Think Christianly, A History of L'Abri, Regent College, and the Christian Study Center movement. Charlie happens to have graduated from Grove City College the same year as me, and in this episode, we talk about the Christian Study Center movement and the importance of embodied community. We also talk about the 4 different kinds of study centers that exist and who they serve, and even how to launch and fund a study center. This episode may inspire you to start a new Christian study center, or it might just encourage you to invite a few guys over for cigars and intellectual discussion around a bonfire this weekend. But either way, I'm sure it will make you think. My name is Joel Sedekase. In 2009, I left my job in the business world to teach Bible at a Christian high school in Chicago. Impacted by my students' questions, I set out on a journey that brought me first to seminary to study apologetics and philosophy of religion, and then into pastoral ministry. As a pastor, I saw firsthand the struggle of believers confronted with questions of life that at first seemed impossible to answer, and the powerful confidence that came when they saw how God's Word gives the answers and guidance they needed. I had a dream to spread that message and equip more followers of Jesus, so my family and I joined Crew and launched the Think Institute. Now, I'm on a mission to equip believers to explain, share, and defend the Christian message by applying timeless biblical truths to current cultural challenges. I don't have all the answers, but I'm determined to find them. And through this show, I'm reporting back to you, the Think Squad, what I discover. Welcome to the Think Podcast. Really quickly before we start, learning how to interpret all of life through the lens of God's Word takes a lot of work, more than just 1 or 2 podcast episodes a week. If you have an interest in the intersection between the biblical worldview and biblical manhood and current events, as I do, as well as philosophy, theology, and many, many leather-bound books, consider joining our free online community, the Think Squad group on Facebook, Gab, and on Signal. There you can join hundreds of other Christ followers who are also on the same journey, and we trade apologetics stories and strategies. We discuss philosophy and theological questions. It's like a huge bull session around a bonfire in your backyard or at your favorite cigar lounge. So check out the Think Squad group on Facebook, Gab, and Signal. All right, Charlie Cotterman, tell us a little bit about yourself, would you, and the work that you do.
Sure. Well, I'm a bivocational pastor and church planter. My wife and I have been married 14 years now. We have 4 kids, 10, 8, and those are girls, and then 2 boys, 5 and 2. So we're in the thick of it. We just got the youngest, the 2-year-old's cast off his leg yesterday after falling off a bunk bed. So we're right in the thick of it.
Oh.
But yeah, so we pastored the church, Oil City Vineyard Church, which we planted in Oil City, Pennsylvania, a small town of about 10,000, very close to where we both grew up, in 2016. And so we've been pastoring that. And then from 2019 on, so the last 3 years, I've been the program director on the project on rural ministry at Grove City College. So our goal with that is to basically help pastors from, southwestern New York, eastern Ohio, western PA, northern West Virginia, in that region, help them thrive, help their congregations thrive. So balancing that.
Very cool. And, one thing that our listeners might not know is that you and I graduated from Grove City College the same year,
right?
2006.
It was a good year.
It was a great year. Agreed. And we were talking backstage. It's so funny because our paths really didn't cross when we were in, and Grove City is not that big of a school. Right. So, but you must have enjoyed it because you came back. You're at Grove City again. You're working there.
That's right. It's a good spot. It's doing a lot of good. Like most college students at small Christian colleges, I had the few times during my stay there where I was like, a little bit pushing against the goads maybe. But yeah, it was good. I spent most of my time there either in the library, classroom, or basketball court. So I didn't see a heck of a lot of people. It was pretty engaged.
Yeah, that's funny. That's cool, man. Well, I was on the rugby team, and so you probably would have caught me out of the IM fields,
right?
Rather than on the basketball court. You there's not much to see with me on the basketball court.
Well, you don't want to see me on the rugby field, so I think we found the right things.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. Well, that's great, man. And the reason why I had you on is you wrote this book to think Christianly. Thank you again for sending me this copy. I want to tell you how I found this book. So I've been very interested in the idea of Christian study centers for years. Here's the thing though, Charlie, I didn't know that they were called study centers. I didn't know that term. All I knew is I was starting this organization called the Think Institute, where I wanted to train and to provide community and a venue for followers of Jesus and people who don't yet follow Jesus to discuss meaningful ideas and really hash things out. And I'd hosted some previous groups in the past, and recently I've been hosting these discussions with men. We call them AWOL. We get together and we smoke cigars, drink scotch, and pontificate. And I started looking around. I'm like, who else has done this? Who's doing this? Is this like Labrie? Is this like, Ligonier? So I started searching around for study centers, and I came across the Consortium of Christian Study Centers. And I thought, this is perfect. How did I never know about this? And then, of course, I started Googling that and looking on YouTube. And then I came across your book, found out you were a Grove City grad. I'm like, I've got to talk to this guy, because this is your area of study. So what led to you writing this book? What is a Christian study center? Just tell us, what do we need to know about this movement?
Sure. So quickly, what led to it is I was a PhD student at the University of Virginia doing church history. I was going to write on a guy by the name of Harold Ockenga. But then when I was there, I kind of discovered, I knew about Francis Schaeffer. My parents had read his books, but kind of rediscovered his influence. And then also at a university like Virginia, there's a very well-known study center there. And I found this amazing place that I'd never heard about before. And I was like drawn in, and I said, I want to know this history. So as I looked into that history, I found, oh, wait, all these other histories I'm doing combine with it. And so I was like, who's written the book on this? No one. So that became my dissertation and the project. So let me tell you about a study center. I'm going to read the definition I have in the book because I think it kind of condenses it. A Christian study center is a local Christian community dedicated to spiritual, intellectual, and relational flourishing via the cultivation of deep spirituality, intellectual and artistic engagement, and hospitable presence. And then one other thing about study centers, so it's a place that's pretty important. It's not just an online teaching or something like that. It's a embodied presence in a place, and usually there's a building or a home, that's opened up for it. But study centers come in a wide variety. And even so, you mentioned the Consortium of Christian Study Centers. The consortium is about 30 and growing, a little more than 30 now, university-based study centers. So that's a specific kind of study center. And Drew Trotter, who started the consortium, lays out this taxonomy of at least 4 different kinds of study centers. So there's the university-based one, which is a pretty significant one, pretty influential. But there's also destination study centers. So we think about Ligonier like that. You didn't find yourself in Stallstown accidentally. You went there on purpose, right?
There's nothing there.
Right. Well, right. I did this little
no,
I did a little pilgrimage there. I did a little pilgrimage there when I was writing, and I was like, this is where everybody came, you know?
Is it up in the mountains? Is it in the Alleghenies?
It's in Ligonier. It's near Ligonier, hence the name.
Yeah.
And there's a set of little kind of mountains out there, the Allegheny Mountains. They're not big. They're like foothills and places that have real mountains, but this is where like the kind of business royalty of Pittsburgh back in the golden Gilded Age era would go and kind of summer and take vacations. So it's kind of had that history behind it. It doesn't look like that now. Okay. But that's what it was.
Okay. So it was a vacation spot for Pittsburgh's wealthy families.
Right.
And that explains why R.C. Sproul set up there, right? Because wasn't there was a wealthy benefactor, a woman who wanted him to come there and set up shop, correct?
Dora Hillman, and she said they were all the Pittsburgh Project and people in the CCO, Coalition of Christian Outreach and stuff. They were going to set up this study center to train student workers in Pittsburgh near Oakland, which made a lot of sense. And then Doris Hillman, this like wealthy widow, is like, "Hey, I'll finance it. Here's like 50 acres. Come out here." And they did.
That's hard to say no to.
That's right. That's right.
I think if someone came up to me and said, "Joel, we want to give the Think Institute a study center. Here's a farm, but you got to go out to I don't know what Woodstock, Illinois, or somewhere else." I'd say, "All right,
that's right.
Lisa, pack up the kids. We're moving."
There you go. So some listener may have that farm right now. You never know.
That's right. And feel free. And listen, if you do, thethink.institute/contact, hit me up.
There you go.
Okay. So you've got destination study centers. You've already mentioned the college campus-based study centers. And I didn't realize that, but the consortium is all college-based.
Right.
Okay.
Right. So they have partners who are not, but they're not official members.
Right. Okay. And I found out that Kurt Jaros, who's a friend of mine, he's got a ministry. Let's see. It's Defenders Media is his ministry, and he's got a bunch of other projects, but he's based here in West Chicago, Illinois, which is close by to where I'm at. And I found out that Defenders Media is a partner organization with the consortium, which is interesting because, it's just, I find out about this consortium and all of a sudden people that I know are connected to it. I feel like there's this secret that's been, kept from me somehow.
Yeah. Well, and what's interesting, and just to say quickly, there's church-based study centers and city-focused study centers. So I'll just make those 4, and then we can come back if we want. But what's interesting about that way you're describing that is that's kind of how the whole thing started anyway. It was kind of like these folks that were like, there's this place in Switzerland. You gotta go there if you get a chance, and it's during the 60s, 50s, and 60s, and people are hiking across places, Europe especially, and so it's like word of mouth, really. But it was probably for them the same kind of thing where it was like, I didn't even know this was out there. And then one day you find it and you're like, where has this been all my life?
Right. So the church-based, so the destination one makes sense to me in a sense, because it's like, well, we're going to go out to the mountains. There's an organization based out of Niagara / Toronto called the Ezra Institute for Contemporary Christianity. Have you heard of them?
I haven't heard of them.
Okay. It's an amazing group, run by Joe Boot, and Ryan Aris, I think is Joe Boot's kind of right-hand man, but they do all the things that you talk about in your book. Like they do these summer institutes and summer camps and all these different things. And they're set up on this escarpment up above, Niagara and above one of the Great Lakes. And so that makes sense to me, being set in the mountains, being set up in the beautiful woods. campus-based ones make sense to me. What's the deal with church-based, and what's the deal with city-based? How do those work?
Yeah, so the best example I have of a city-based institute is the C.S. Lewis Institute. That's now in 20-odd cities around the world, mostly in the U.S., but around the world. And it started in the D.C. area. Started actually initially at the University of Maryland, but they moved pretty quickly into the city of D.C. And they kind of take a think tank approach, but they're also discipleship, but it's not, it's the hardest one to pin down, quite frankly, the city-based one, but that's the best example I have of a city-based study center. So the C.S. Lewis Institute in DC basically tries to be a study center for the whole city, and whoever wants can come in.
How successful is that?
I mean, they've been at it a long time, and they've replicated, and their Twitter following has like 40,000 followers. So that seems like they're doing all right.
Yeah, I'd say so.
So so they're doing something that's resonating, right?
Okay, so that fascinates me because KJ Johnson, who is another friend of mine, actually, he and I went to seminary together at Trinity, based here in Deerfield, Illinois. He is the Chicago director of the C.S. Lewis Institute.
Okay.
And I've actually had him on the show before. We talked about discipleship. Of course, at that point, I had no idea about the consortium or the study center movement and whatnot. Right. But it does, now that I know that they're connected, as part of the same movement, I can definitely see similarities to like a Labrie, but it just seems so much more decentralized. It's like we're going to do this event at this church, but we're not affiliated with the church. They're just hosting. We're going to do this event here, and
that's where I think you get that city approach. It's like where we have these partners. Now, study centers do that too. I was just talking to the director of Anselm House at the University of Minnesota, and he was telling me about just how many churches are connected in, and a whole range of them. And that would be true at almost any study center. That's what you want. Is this wide? As a parachurch organization, you want a lot of connections to the actual church, because that's really your lifeblood. So, but yeah, I mean, that's why you can see them. They're not in it. That's what I mean. This one's the hardest one to pin down because they're not in a space that's theirs that everyone comes to, right? Unlike most study centers, it's decentralized, as you mentioned. So it's a little different. Okay,
so the goal, what's the one thing that these study centers all have in common? I mean, you gave your your definition rather. What's the common thread that unites the college-based, city-based, church-based, and destination-based? Is it exploring the life of the mind? Is it, is it apologetics? What is that?
Yeah, well, one thing I think you have to make clear is one of the ways they're all connected is really a shared history, right? They were more connected initially than they are now. So, for instance, the C.S. Lewis Institute, other than relational connections, might not feel very connected to the consortium, and it might go city by city how connected they actually are. But historically, they were founded by the same impulse and even the same person in James Houston, who had helped be the founding principal at Regent College in Vancouver. Which also feels different, right, than these other study centers on some level. But what unites them all, I really think, is probably the biggest thing that unites them is this attempt to be holistically engaged with Christ and his work in the world and the gospel. And, that's what set Labrie apart, this engaging of culture, this like almost Kuyperian, like every square inch mentality, right? And
can you unpack that for those who don't know who Abraham Kuyper was?
Yeah, so Abraham Kuyper, this statesman, theologian, politician from the Netherlands, and one of the things he said is Jesus looks at all creation, I'm paraphrasing, and says mine, right?
Right.
And I think that really shines through in a lot of this, is this sense of like there's a real vocational sensitivity and awareness that realizes that Christians can serve the Lord in a wide range of vocations because it's all God's. All truth is God's, right? So I think that, and one of the ways they talk about it a lot, and especially places like C.S. Lewis Institute talked about this a lot, but it's head and heart, right? we want to be engaged with our minds, but we also want to be engaged spiritually. L'Abri being like a classic model of that.
And it's happening in community as well.
Right.
So these study centers, I mean, I was fascinated to read about the ways that the college-based study centers, they've done, they do snacks at finals, and they'll have, students come in, and it seemed like it wasn't just Christian students, but all kinds of students, and they're coming in, they're eating together, studying together. You remember back, finals week, commiserating together. And I remember at Grove City, I think.
Yeah, for sure. It's a tough time, a lot of stress. You might not be eating healthy or whatever. And it started with a bunch of parents that said, hey, we have the study center, let's feed the kids. And then it just became this huge thing. So when I was at UVA, during finals week, if you would walk up on the street, and it's less than 1,000 feet from the rotunda, so right at the center of campus, like right off campus, grounds. They would call it grounds. I'll be in trouble at UVA for saying campus grounds. And you would walk up and you couldn't even get up the street. I mean, I'm talking hundreds of kids would be in line and be out in the street having snacks, and 3 meals a day for like 5 days.
I mean, that's incredible.
Yeah. And there's no way all of them were believers, and there's no way all of them were like regular study center attendees. There's just people that knew, here's some hospitality.
So is there any evangelistic effort that's tied up with that? Is there, is it like, hey, we're going to give them food and we invite them back to this evangelistic event, or, food and a gospel tract? I mean, they're probably not doing that, but is it just extending a hand of hospitality to say, hey, Christians care about you, or is there any sort of push in that regard?
I mean, the thing is it's all so interwoven in the life of the place. And that's why they talk about at UVA and many of these places, like the study center itself is almost like a member of the staff, the building, right? Because it becomes so important, because it's a welcoming place. They always have coffee on, you can get a snack there, whatever. There's a room to study. Like at finals at a big university, you can't find a space to study in the library anywhere, but you can go to the study center, So I think it's this knowledge that there's like open doors. And the thing is, if you keep frequenting this place, a member of the staff is going to talk to you. Students, college students that are really excited about Jesus are going to tell people about it. Him, right? Mm-hmm. And the other thing that's cool in some of these, and UVA is a classic example, and this is one of the things I love about UVA's Center for Christian Study, is it's not just a community around whoever aligns with them, but they provide a monthly meeting space for all the campus ministries. And so they house the campus ministries of the whole university in this study center once a month. And so they forge ties between the university. So the campus ministry. So like any leader from any campus ministry could come to one of these lunches and just talk to students.
Oh, that's very cool. So they're creating a fishing pond, so to speak, for the different ministries.
Yeah. And just a sense of we're all on the same team,
Well, that's really cool. And, I appreciated what you said about they all started from a similar movement, similar people were involved in the starting of many of these. You mentioned now many of them have kind of gone their own ways. I know new ones have started since that first generation has either passed away or moved on. I've been thinking a lot, Charlie, lately about community. Mm-hmm. And, it's one of the things that's very important to the Think Institute. I mean, one of our first mottos when we started was truth in conversation. Mm-hmm. The idea is not just, hey, let me just broadcast to you a bunch of ideas, but rather let's have a dialogue. And if we're both aimed at truth together, maybe we'll find it, maybe we'll discover it. And so the difficulty that I've found, and I've been leading men's discussion groups since about 2013, in bars, in homes, in cafes, around bonfires and backyards. And, I've seen there are some guys who are very committed to it. And there are other guys who are like, man, I would love to be a part of that. I just don't have time.
Right.
Can we talk about the challenge of seeking community outside of those college years, after college, after grad school, after you're off campus or off grounds for UVA people? Mm-hmm. How are people finding community, especially, Christian community?
Yeah. Well, that is a great question, because it's been so hard, right? And obviously COVID hasn't made it easier. So, I mean, I think about that as a pastor all the time. How are people in the church I pastor finding community? And some of them are finding it pretty well, and some of them aren't, and I think of it as a busy father. How am I going to find community?
Yeah.
And that's why I think it does take intentionality. And there's some level of, the church provides us with community that's like not homogenous, right? Like, so you have community the church provides us with elderly, with young people, and it's great. Right. But there's also really a need, as Ralph Winter noted, between the church and then these parachurch organizations and that are more affinity driven, more goal driven, right? Mm-hmm. And I think, that's what study centers highlight, right? Is this, we have an affinity together about thinking well, about, thinking about our vocations well, and part of it, like the food and all the stuff that goes along with it, it's not inconsequential, because like food preached a sermon at Labrie, right? Like the way they handled it, it was preaching, basically.
The way the table was set.
Yeah.
Everything.
It said something about the beauty, truth, and goodness of God and what we thought about embodied existence.
That's good.
So that all matters. But I think if you can find a group of people, obviously in your local church, it's great. And you're not going to have affinity with everyone, but that's really good. So you need community there. But you also need probably a small group, at least, of people that have some affinities in the same thing that you can pull each other and push each other on, And I think there are seasons in life where that's easier and harder, right? So right out of college, you'll feel it because all your best friends lived on the same hall and they were just like 3 feet away. And life's not like that by and large. But then, you kind of find a nice little like rhythm. You might find some people, find some community. Then you get married, or then you have a kid. Then you have 2 kids that are not in the same sleeping schedule, and you can't take the little one out at night, and it's just different.
Speaking from experience, I can tell.
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think we're always going through seasons, and then you think, like, as someone my age, you think, well, once these kids get older and out of the house, but then I see everyone that age taking care of their elderly parents, and it's just, it's always going to be hard. It's always going to take intentionality.
Is it something that's worth pursuing, or do we just give up on it?
I don't think we give up on it. That's what our culture tells us to do. Like, just live for yourself and you and your screen, right? But no, I mean, and that's why the church is the backbone of all this, because if, we know we can't give up on the church, and the church keeps us in community. But I do think that even there are times where you can seek out a little more, whether it's within the church but an affinity group or something, so you're talking about working with men, and if people that want to wrestle with these ideas, that want to wrestle about how the gospel applies to how they lead their family, how they work in the office or out on the contracting site, those are really powerful conversations, but they do take some affinity for them. It's not just going to happen.
Right. Yeah. It's got to be something that you seek out intentionally. Right. If you don't mind me asking, is this something that you have in your own life? Is this something that you're pursuing at all? I mean, you write about these study centers and these affinity groups. I like how you describe that. Is this something that you have personally been pursuing in your own life?
Yeah, and it's been seasonal for me, So when my wife and I were just married, we moved to a whole nother city to be part of an intentional community, And some of that worked out well, and some of that, our idealism was definitely crushed, right? But like those things at 23 don't always work out well, But then we went through a season before kids. We had our core group of people, but I'm telling you, with kids, that core group's gotten smaller, and our spare time's gotten smaller. So now we have a pretty small group of core people. It almost feels like a COVID bubble, right? But it's our small group of core people. But I do think that can even change with the seasons. I think there's going to be a season coming when we're out of diapers here at this house, and we're going to get into some new ability. And I do think some of that ebb and flow is just part of life and part of embodied existence, and we have to be able to deal with it.
Man, that makes a lot of sense. So, all right, let me pick your brain directly.
Yeah.
I am thinking about developing the Think Institute into more of a study center. I'm talking with a few other men about this. One is a scholar. Another is a friend of mine who's more of a blue collar guy, contractor,
Mm-hmm.
another one who's a pastor, another one who leads a men's ministry. And, we've all got this desire to start, as you put it, in an affinity group. Walk me through some of the steps. You've studied this history. You've studied the movement.
Mm-hmm.
How do guys like us go about starting this group? Does it need to have a physical space? Does it need to be owned, rented? What is that? Who do we gather? Who are the people that we need on the team? Like Regent College, they made sure to recruit the right people.
Right.
What's that process look like?
And here's the thing. What you find is it's so contextual. It really matters on your context and what you feel God pulling you to. And one of the things, so I was talking with Drew Trotter, because I've tossed around the idea of kind of a rural study center where I'm at.
Sure.
Because I love the movement, and it just doesn't happen in rural space as much. And I just wonder what to do about that. And so I've thought about it too. And when I talked to Drew Trotter, he said the biggest thing is get some people and start praying, which makes a heck of a lot of sense, but it might not be our first step. And just start praying over the thing,
Isn't that sad? Yeah, you're right.
And then the other thing I always recommend to people, and this has been part of this history, is start making a few pilgrimages. Like go to a few study centers, like find the ones that you like, that you really believe in, and try to get some of your team there if you're serious about it. I think a lot of the stuff is like, once you see it, you know what it feels like.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. So it's really powerful. But the other thing is, and this is something the consortium, I think, does really well. There's no blueprint. There's not like, this is how you start a study center at a university, because it is like every university has its own ins and outs, every town, every, neighborhood. And that's where what's beautiful about this movement, I think, is it really sees us as actual embodied human beings in specific places. That's why I do think it's important to have a physical building. Like, it's not a study center unless you have a center to come to. Yeah. Like there's tons of online content out there, but like if you want to have a study center, you almost have to have a place that draws people in.
That's a really good point. There are some ministries that have an online presence. There's one, I think it's called Cross to Crown. I enjoy their content, and they have this like a school of theology. And when I first started looking into it, I was frustrated because it's like, all of our training, everything is done in person, connected with this church. And at first I was frustrated because I think they're based out west, like in Colorado, and I'm here in Chicagoland. I was so frustrated. I'm like, no, I want to get this training. I want to engage with the content. As I've studied the study center movement, read your book, and done more thinking about it, I actually really do see the wisdom in that. Yeah, you need to have a place. And that's one thing. And not to mention the last 2 years of being, everybody being all freaked out, especially here in Illinois, man. I don't know what it's like in Pennsylvania, but people are at least in the city of Chicago, people are still very nervous, very jittery about getting together. And it's just really pointed up the fact that we do need to be in person. We are embodied individuals. Yeah. So you think that that's very important, that the center.
I do. I think because that's where you extend hospitality, like, it just isn't the same online. It just can't be, there's a place for it. But like in the book, I track, the development at Ligonier, from kind of an in-person study center to kind of this basically one guy in front of a camera ministry.
Right.
And it's not that R.C. Sproul didn't do good things with it. I think he did, but something was lost. Something was lost.
What is your personal take on that? Did he make the right call in switching from a study center to more of a media organization?
I mean, I don't know what the right call was, but I'll say something was lost.
Don't hold back now, Charlie. Don't hold back.
Yeah, that's right. Hey, R.C. Sproul was very kind to give me an interview for this book before he passed, and I really enjoyed the conversation. Yeah. He's very generous. I think it makes all the sense in the world if you're trying to grow big to go down to Florida to a growing metropolis. But I think there was something about its origins in that rural place in the Western PA that's had its own little local history that formed. He was a Western PA guy, born and raised, you know, and
you could tell too.
right? It formed him, and it formed the place. And so, yeah, I think something was lost. And I do think there's just something about, like, I mean, most of us feel this, like, bigger is always better. It's an American way. But, like, sometimes just be really faithful where you are. I mean, and Ligonier still had a pretty big footprint, even when it was in the hills of Stallstown, Pennsylvania.
Sure.
I mean, he was still on the, Council for Biblical Inerrancy and helping to write the 78 Chicago Biblical Inerrancy Declaration,
That was when the study center was still going?
Yeah.
So that was before he moved to Orlando.
Yeah, that was in 77. He became the president. In 78, they wrote this Chicago Declaration there.
Wow.
Yeah. So
I didn't realize that.
Packer was coming in. I mean, it was pretty cool.
That's very cool.
That's always a good reminder. Those kind of places are a good reminder for me that like God can do things even in small places, even in your neighborhood, even in my rural neighborhood. But the other reality is it was tough. I mean, they worked hard. People burnt out, having people in their homes all the time. And this kind of focus on community isn't easy. It's not easy on families sometimes. It's not easy on people. And they had to pull back a little because they just couldn't feed all these people in like the workers' homes all the time and have them cook all these meals. And it was tough.
Right. How would you say that study centers not based around a college campus, so a city-based or a destination-based or church-based, how are they funded nowadays?
Yeah.
Do you charge members? Is it like a country club deal? Is it like a fraternity? Is it pay per event? Is it funded on the back end? Like my wife and I were missionaries. All of our costs are offset by ministry supporters who believe in us, who've sent us to do the work that we do. How are they funded?
Yeah, it's a great question. So donors are a huge part. And that's where college ones are, a step ahead because their alumni base is always changing. So for instance, the one at Virginia just is almost done with a $9 million expansion, like
unbelievable. Crazy. Really?
Yeah.
Wow. That's great.
So it's crazy.
I'm not jealous of that at all, man.
Right.
No, I wouldn't.
Right.
The Bible says don't envy. So I don't envy.
Yeah.
That.
Money has no award for us.
That's right.
So, yeah, but I think, so there's different funding models. So the one at Madison was funded by a foundation.
It's Upper House?
Yeah. With a real estate guy who had lots of money, and he kind of put a church in one of his buildings. There was a church that meets there, and out of that church kind of came Upper House in the same building. And it basically is fully funded by this foundation. That's a rare model, though I think it could become more common as there are more of these foundations looking to have an influence on campus and yet not be right on campus for various reasons. I think when I think of a study center, I just think if you start small, I mean, the Schaeffers started just inviting people into their homes. The only library they had was Francis Schaeffer's library, like it started off super sustainable, super small. And I mean, in some ways, Regent started the same way. And so many of these, it's just find a space, start with what you have, make it as sustainable as you can. If you can get a down payment, you're on your way. And maybe that comes from a handful of friends, a few churches that believe in it. And it's always good to have churches behind it. I think it's best to have multiple churches behind it, not to let it be only one church's thing, unless it's going to be out of that church, right? A lot of the church-based study centers are out of basically mega churches.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with Michael Heiser at all? Does that name ring any bells for you?
Doesn't ring a bell for me.
All right. He's an author. He writes a lot about angels and demons and that sort of thing. But he's like this brilliant scholar, but he's based out of, man, I interviewed him on my show. I should know this, but it's like this school of theology that's run out of a church. And, that sort of has me thinking, like, where's the line between a church-based study center and a church-based, more like a school of theology? Right. Like, so where do you see that line? Is there a line?
I don't know. I mean, one line would be accreditation.
Oh yeah, sure.
Okay. And that's where a lot of study centers that tried to get accreditation ran into some real hurdles. And I talk about that in the book, because
Yeah,
you
you
have
do.
library costs and stuff, and you have endowments that you have to have, and or you're
Yeah,
not
you
going
gotta
to
have
get
like
accredited.
like $500,000 or something
Right.
like that. Like you got to
Right.
come up with.
So what's the difference between an unaccredited school of theology and a study center? I'm not sure there is that much, except size.
Okay.
You know, because they're kind of doing the same thing. But when I see a study center, it's not just a school. It is a place where you know, it's holistic in itself. There's hospitality, there are couches, there's a library, there's, you know, a good kitchen. You can have all kinds of events. You can host events that aren't even your own just because you have a good space. You know, some of these university-based ones have counselors on staff, and you can get counseling, you know, for free. So yeah, I mean, I think sometimes in a church would have to be pretty intentional to make it not feel like a really institutional thing if they're going to do that.
Yeah. I can totally see that. You got me thinking with, you mentioned like, you know, couches and things. And I know a lot of these study centers are very intentional with the way that they structure. I forget which one, maybe it's the one in Virginia, but it's designed to really feel like a home, right? Like,
yeah,
big
well,
hearts.
It was literally a home, and then they expanded,
That's
but
right.
it started as a home, you know? And even when they expanded, so a lot of these people had spent time at L'Abri. A lot of L'Abri conversations happened around a fireplace. So when they expanded, they made sure there was a fireplace in every room in the library. And
that's what I was thinking of.
And because it's the same idea, like architecture matters, space matters. All of life says something about what we believe.
Man, yeah, totally. It's great to hear this stuff articulated, because these are ideas that, you know, I'm becoming more and more aware of. Architecture matters. In-person matters. This is why, I don't know your personal feelings on this, but church over Zoom is not really church.
It's not the same at all. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, because, you know, we're supposed to be embodied. We're supposed to have presence. So my question for you then, Charlie, is, and maybe we can bring it to a close after this. Sure. What are the essential activities that a study center needs to be doing, regardless of where it fits in the taxonomy? So it's not a school. It's not just hosting classes. It's not just a small group either, right? We're not just meeting for Bible studies. What are those essential, you know, sine qua non activities of a study center?
Well, I think it's pretty hard to have a study center if you don't study. You know, it's part of the whole thing.
Right.
If you don't engage the mind, you have a ministry house, you have whatever, but you don't have a study center. So I have heard people say, if you don't have a library, it's hard to call yourself a study center. And there are a handful of these prominent ones that don't have libraries, it does make some people say, oh my goodness, what's wrong? Yeah. But yeah, you got to be able to study. You got to be able to pray. It's this ora et labora kind of pray and work kind of thing. And you got to be able to have a hospitable presence. You know, I feel like those are the things. It takes into account, you know, it's a spiritual community, it's an intellectual community, and it's a hospitable community. And if you have those three things, you know, and intellectual, by the way, I'm not just like systematic theology, but like engaging culture and the arts to the best of our abilities. And I'm not an art historian. I can only engage so much, but like we should realize that God speaks through this, and hopefully study centers can bring people along who can talk about it in a meaningful way. And if you do that, what I've seen time and time again in these is it's so compelling that it then becomes a fourth kind of community, which is an aspirational one, where you want to recreate it. You want to tell everybody about it. You want to, because it's just, we're made to be holistically doing the spiritual, intellectual, vocational community. You know, that's what we're made for.
I see that, man. I look at, you know, I mentioned the Ezra Institute earlier. That would be one that you might really appreciate. If you check them out, sure. They've got some videos on YouTube and Vimeo where they do like a tour of their center. And you definitely get, at least I do, I get that aspirational sense. You watch and you're like, oh, beautiful library. You know, look at the dark hardwood accoutrements in the, you know, in the fireplace. It's just, it's beautiful. It's like, I want to recreate this. There's something there's something true and good and beautiful about the space and what they're doing. So so study, hospitable presence, spiritual, the spiritual life, it becomes aspirational. Could you just elaborate real briefly on when you say study? That makes all the sense in the world if we're talking about college students. But imagine we've got a bunch of men in their 20s, 30s, and 40s. How are they studying? Is it a discussion group? Is it just, hey, here's a library with a bunch of books, come and study at will? Or is it a course? What is it?
I think all of those things, right? So, I mean, one of the things, especially if you're not on a college campus, I think you might pick, if you have a few guys in the similar vocation, you do a study on what's the gospel mean for this, you know, and you read about that. Or maybe it's not, one of the things I think there's huge need for is all of this vocational talk. And other people have said this too, and I completely agree, for like blue collar type jobs and like trades. So like, what's it look like to have a session where woodworking, you know, like we just learned something about it, you know, or something like that. And we talk about like, maybe there's a little bit of a theology around it. But maybe it's just like, this is part of like being part of God's good creation, that we know how to work with it, you know? So book studies, things like that too, prayer groups, Bible studies, all of those things. I mean, it's just trying to engage our minds.
That's very cool. You know, what you just said reminds me of a group that my boys are in called Trail Life. You ever heard of Trail Life?
I have heard of it, but I don't know much about it.
Okay, so you're familiar with like Boy Scouts, right? Okay, Trail Life, they hate when you say this, but Trail Life is like a Christian Boy Scouts.
Sure.
If that helps paint a picture. Yep. So I'm the assistant chaplain at my boys' troop.
Oh, cool.
So I handle a lot of the teaching stuff, the spiritual teaching stuff. And it's really been fascinating, Charlie, because the boys have learned how to use a knife, how to carve a shape out of soap, how to start a fire, how to, all like how to camp. And they're setting up tents and grilling and cooking things over fires. And all these things that it's, you might think at first blush, not overtly spiritual, but what's amazing is a good patrol leader at the end of the lesson will bring in scripture and say, here's scripture that speaks about what we just talked about, or, that talks about how God is like a consuming fire. And we just did fire safety or whatever.
Yeah, sure.
So it's been very edifying for me because I'm learning along with my boys how to do all these things,
Yeah.
So there's something really powerful about that.
Right. And the same thing happens in a study center in that, like, let's think about Liberty real quick. And this might be a good thing to end on.
Okay.
One of the things that happened at Liberty is it expanded the horizon of the possible, like the imaginative horizon of people for what kind of work they could do to the glory of God in the world. And that is honestly what I think any study center should have as one of its primary emphases. How do we help people reimagine how big the scope of meaningful God-glorifying work is, and then throw themselves into whatever God's called them to, which is going to hopefully be widely varying, and then we support each other in it.
Love it. That's brilliant, man. Good. A message that more need to hear and really embrace. Charlie, how can people get your book? How can they follow your work?
So you can get it basically anywhere. Most small Christian bookstores can order it for you. Obviously, Amazon, IVP, you can get it right from them. It's now out in paperback, so it's a little bit cheaper and a little easier to handle. If you want to follow me on Twitter or Facebook or something like that, I'm trying to, I write every so often various things and try to just think Christianly about what God has me in.
And there you go. And the name of the book is To Think Christianly. It's by Charles E. Cotterman.
That's right. Yeah,
that's right. Thank you. Man, very, very good book. Really worth reading. Whether or not you're thinking about starting a study center, it's just a fascinating movement in church history. So if you like history, if you're into Christian community, I would just very highly recommend this book. It struck me almost as, there was a book by Tim Keller that came out years ago called Centered Church. And as a pastor, that really impacted me. What he was talking about, Charlie, your book, To Think Christianly, I would put in that same vein. It's very, it's telling a story and it's getting into a lot of details, but it's in the process, I learned a lot of practical things that I can do as well. And so really fascinating, definitely worth reading. Brother, thank you so much for coming on, and all the best to you and your family and the work you're doing at Grove City. And maybe we can talk again sometime.
Yeah, sounds good. And same to you. Thanks for having me.
Okay, that about wraps it up for this episode. The Think Podcast is a production of the Think Institute and is produced by yours truly, Joel Sedekase. The Think Institute operates under Church Movements, a ministry of Cru under the division of Cru City. To learn about how to support the Think Institute and my family tax-free, go to thethink.institute/partner. I hope you heard something helpful today. I know I did. Remember, this is not goodbye. This has just been a short stop on the journey as we learn to lead our families in defending the Christian message. And we'll see you next time. Until then, I hope it made you think.